Okay, chapter 26. And then Job goes on in verses 5 through 14, and he says, you want to talk about God's power? He said, you don't know anything about God's power. You don't begin to grasp the awesome power that God possesses. So who are you to try to explain to me about the power of God? Okay, chapter 27. These are Job's final words to the three guys. Let's just read this together. I'll start and then somebody can pick up when I stop. And Job continued his discourse. As surely as God lives, who has denied me justice, the Almighty who has made my life bitter. As long as I have life within me, the breath of God is in my nostrils. My lips will not say anything wicked, and my tongue will not utter lies. What has he just done?
Defended himself.
Yeah, but go ahead. Against whom?
Yeah.
Defended himself against whom?
God himself.
Yeah.
Okay.
God, you have denied me justice, and you have made my life bitter, but I will not use my tongue to speak against you. I will not use my tongue to utter lies and say anything wicked. And look at what he says in verse 5.
Yeah.
I will never admit you are in the right. Till I die, I will not deny my integrity. Better be more. And yet there are other instances. I mean, Abraham gets in God's face. David gets in God's face. Somebody was telling me one time that they were really mad at God, and my response to them was, and who exactly did that hurt?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, be mad at God all you want, and certainly he gives us the latitude to do that, but who does it really hurt? Go on to chapter 28. He confirmed it and tested it, and he said to the human race, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to shun evil is understanding. Why put this chapter here? Why don't we make that an assignment for next week? Why don't you see if you can find out who's speaking there? But isn't it interesting? We've got all of this discussion that's gone on. Okay? All the wranglings of who's right and what, because aren't the three friends of Job's really trying to talk about wisdom? They're drawing out their wisdom, and they're trying to explain Job's circumstance out of their wisdom, right? Okay? And is not Job responding to them out of his wisdom, out of his understanding? Okay? And isn't it interesting here at the end of all of their discussions? Now, Job comes back in chapter 29 through about 31. Job comes back and he restates his case all over again. It's kind of like a standalone thing, okay, of Job saying, this is my complaint. This is what's going on in my life. So the real debate, if you want to call it that, ends at the end of chapter 27. Because the friends never respond to Job's final defense. The last thing that's said is Job's response, and then we get this poem about wisdom. And it seems to me that after all the wranglings, because all you have to do is read through this and you can find out, this has become a very personal argument, hasn't it? Job feels offended that his friends would turn on him. Job's friends feel offended that he wouldn't listen to the very obvious nature of their wisdom, as obvious as far as they're concerned, right? And then we get this, and then if you think of it with me, think of this book as a response to how do we deal with the issue of suffering, of good people suffering in a world where a good God rules. And you try to make sense out of it. You try to get wisdom out of it. And you come to the end of this poem, and it really makes it very crystal clear, doesn't it? If you're looking for wisdom, the place that you're going to find wisdom is the fear of the Lord. And when we try to make sense out of this life without factoring into all that goes on in this life, a God who truly is involved, a God who truly is working in us, a God who truly is accomplishing his purpose in us, then we really can't make sense out of Job's circumstances. If we accept the fact, as the first 2 chapters of Job reveal to us, that there is a God who knows exactly what's going on in Job's life, who knows exactly what the situation and the circumstances are, who is accomplishing something in Job in all of this process. Okay, you said it well at the beginning of the class, Larry, that in the midst of our testing, there has to come this settled place of rest in who God is, and in the fact that he really is working for my good in the midst of all that I'm going through. What Job shows us is how easy it is for our humanity to get the issues clouded and to keep from being able to see that, well, what's the song that we used to sing? When you can't see his hand, trust his heart. What is the character and the nature of God toward us? Because if we truly understand God's nature as much as it's possible for us to understand it as we come into relationship with him, then in the same way that no earthly parent would ever, in his or her right mind, would ever bring harm to their children, neither would God bring harm to us. And so there then comes a place of rest. But you see, to the person who's looking at the world as they see it, and all they can see is the suffering of whether it's righteous people or the suffering of innocent people. And then they want to point an accusing finger at God. They've violated the very principle that's articulated at the end of this poem. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Until we come to the place. And can we just take a second and talk about the idea of the fear of the Lord? Because there are a lot of Christians that are very uncomfortable with that phrase, the fear of the Lord. Because it creates some negative images in their minds. So what do we mean? What do we mean when we talk about the fear of the Lord? Well, and who and what he is.
Yeah.
You know, the awesomeness
Exactly.
of his power and of his grandness.
Yeah.
I remember standing on the side of a mountain up in Yosemite. We were walking down. You know how they carve the steps to some of their high places. They carve them in the granite rock of the mountain. And in this one particular instance, I don't even have any idea why I was there, because I never go to places like this. It just scares me to death. But they had a handrail screwed into the side of the rock wall, and there wasn't much else out here but open space. And as I stood there was a certain fear of falling, but there was also a certain fear that came from the awesomeness of the view
Oh, yeah.
that I had. And it's a little, and I think there's a part of this idea of the fear of the Lord that almost takes your breath away. That God is so majestic and so full of splendor and so extreme in every kind of way we can imagine. I don't want to use the word awesome because it's so overused. But we get a sense of something that brings us to our knees. It is so incredible. It's so full of splendor. It's so full of this awesomeness that it literally brings us to, it causes us to realize. And here, this was part of the thought that occurred to me as I was kind of meditating on this verse. The fear of the Lord has with it a sense of where I'm captured by the picture of what it is that I'm seeing. And it somehow takes hold of me. It is so much greater and bigger than I am. It reaches out and grabs me. And it causes me to be drawn into its orbit. Does that make sense? And it causes me to be, it is so mighty and so incredible. It's like within a cell where electrons and protons are drawn, they have this magnetism that holds them together, and they are drawn to one another. And it's the fear of the Lord. It's something that draws me to Him. And when I begin to see that and see it for what it is, and begin to look into it, I begin to get a glimpse of the wisdom of God. Begin to get a glimpse of what true understanding is, because I'm looking into who God is. Does that make sense? That's a phrase that can be thrown about and can have positive and negative implications to it. I want you to jump over with me to one last place, and that's to Job chapter 32. Elihu begins to speak. And I just want to read the first 5 verses. It says, so these 3 men stopped answering Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. But Elihu, son of Barachel the Buzite, of the family of Ram, became very angry with Job for justifying himself rather than God. He was also angry with the 3 friends because they had found no way to refute Job and yet had condemned him. Now, Elihu had waited before speaking to Job because they were older than he. But when he saw that the 3 men had nothing more to say, his anger was aroused. There's some interesting things that are pointed out there. What stands out to you? Statements that are made here. We get our first picture of what Job's problem was. He was righteous in his own eyes. That's the first time that I remember reading anything in Job that clearly articulated what Job's problem really was. And perhaps what God was trying to put his finger on in Job's life. That he was righteous in his own eyes. He had to try, and it gets back to the Pharisaism and all of that. But we get this picture of Job, who had done everything he could to live a godly life, who tried to honor God and be faithful to God and all of that. And there's something that can happen in our lives that we get so caught up and so bound up in trying to be good that we begin to believe our own press releases.
Yeah.
And here's Job, at least according to this account. And we have to believe, because it's an inspired writing, that it's accurate. That part of what Job was harboring in his heart is that he was righteous in his own eyes. And that's why he was arguing so vehemently against his friends, because they were trying to convince him that he wasn't. And yet, down in his heart, here's this kernel of, or this seed that, if allowed to continue to grow, can become something very ugly. Hebrews 12 talks about not allowing a bitter root. Now, Hebrews specifically talks about a bitter root of unbelief, but it can be a bitter root of any number of things that can take root in us. And it seems here, and I think as we look at God's comments back to Job, and as God addresses Job and says, well, you know, if you're all, this is my opening line to it, Job, if you're all that good, then explain to me some of these realities of the world. And of course, Job has no explanation. And then he says something very interesting as we get toward the end of the book, that we'll wait till we get there.